New Testament survey, lesson number 4. I want to show you one thing, and I'll show you one thing. Habakkuk 2. You'll have to go to Matthew, go to the left. Habakkuk 2, and then we'll go to Romans chapter 1. I'll show you a couple of things right here. People's wondering about Old Testament differences and go to Matthew, go left. Anybody having trouble finding Habakkuk? Chapter 2, and look at verse 4, 2:4. Behold, his soul, which is lifted up, is not upright in him, but the just, notice this phrase, the just shall live by what? His faith. You see that in Habakkuk? His faith. Old Testament, his faith. Romans chapter 1. Romans chapter 1, verse 17. For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith. That is, as is written, the just shall live by what? What's the difference? Old Testament, the just shall live by his faith. The person, his. Old Testament, Jesus Christ hadn't died yet. So they're living by their faith. Romans, on this side of the cross, Jesus has died yet. We live by the faith. The just shall live by faith. That's the difference. Old Testament, New Testament. And so all through the Bible you'll see differences like that. The Bible's not contradictory. But you've got to find out where you're talking about, who you're talking to. Just like, think about this. Have you ever had anybody take something you said out of context? They took something you said and they twisted and turned it and made you sound like you said something you didn't say. Right? People do that in the Bible all the time. They'll take one verse from here, one verse from here, two verses from here, another verse from here and say, let's start a new church. We got a new doctrine. You can't do that. You can't do that. So, now, what was I going to show you? All right. Let me finish up by doing this. Let me give you the list of the 12 disciples. Let me give you the list of 12 disciples. I want to talk about the 12 disciples for a second and give you something very interesting about that, or I think it's interesting. You got Simon Peter. Well, actually, you can go to Matthew. I'll tell you what, go to Matthew. We'll read the list out of Matthew chapter. Well, I'm looking. Anybody see them? Matthew 10. Yes, Matthew 10. Matthew 10, start at verse 2. These are the names of the 12 apostles. Excuse me. Now the names of the 12 apostles are these. First, Simon, which is called Peter, Andrew, his brother, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas, Matthew the publican, James, the son of Alphaeus, and Labius, whose surname is Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite, and Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him. And then, of course, these 12 went forward, commanding, they preaching the same thing, go not in the way of the Gentiles, so on and so forth. It's very interesting how Jesus chose these 12 disciples. Every one of them are different. Some of them are fishermen. One of them is a tax collector. One of them is a physician. Luke was a physician. Matthew was a tax collector. Peter, James, and John were fishermen. Here's something just interesting. Simon Peter is the one you're most familiar with because he has a problem that some of us have, and that is open mouth, insert foot. Anybody like that anywhere in the building? Simon Peter, his characteristics: impulsive, spitfire. Open your mouth, insert foot. He's going to say something, first one, and it's usually the wrong thing. He was supposedly, by the Jewish historian Josephus, he was crucified upside down. Then you got Andrew. I'm not going to go all over all 12, but I want to show you something. Every time Andrew's name is mentioned, it's Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. How many of y'all hated that growing up? That's Jamie's little brother. No. My name's Jeremy. That's Jamie's little brother. Everywhere in the Bible, that's Andrew, that's Simon Peter's brother. Don't even give his last name. That's Simon Peter's brother. So you'd know him. Now, here's something about Andrew. Andrew, every time you see his name mentioned, John chapter 1, he's bringing somebody to the Lord. Matter of fact, Andrew's the one that brought Peter to the Lord and said, hey, you got to come meet this man. Now here I'm going to draw a point here. Andrew is a quiet guy that stands over in the corner. If you saw him, you'd say, well, that's Peter's brother. You probably wouldn't even call him by his name. Very low key, not much about him, just every time you see him, he's the one who went and got the boy to bring the lunch so Jesus can feed the 5,000. He's always bringing somebody. Okay? And then you got John. You got John, who is the closest to the Lord. He's always the closest to the Lord. He's the one that Jesus gave his mother to at the cross. All right? And then you got Philip. Philip is the guy that, the feeding the 5,000, Jesus says, what do we got? Philip is the one that gets his calculator out and goes, now Jesus, this, if you look at this pie chart right here, Jesus, you will see that this is not going to work. You got 5 loaves, 2 fishes, the pie chart, and you got 5,000 people. Jesus, come on, look at your chart. Okay. Now, I said all that to say this. And then you got Judas Iscariot, which is a betrayer. Right? And all of this. Now, what is Jesus doing? All right, every one of these 12, I did a study, it's been several years ago, and studied every one of these disciples. I'm not even sure I've done it here or not. Their characteristics. And every one of them we can pinpoint in our church. Every one of them. You've got Simon Peters. You open the floor for 5 seconds. Oh, Brother Jeremy, here they go. And most times it's the wrong thing. Then you've got some Phillips. Bringing up the new building. Now, Brother Jeremy, this chart. This chart here. Now, this is what we got in the thing. And this is what we got. Now look, it's the chart. Do we not?
That's right.
And you've got some Judases. You do have some Judases. Because when they come up and hug you and they pat you, all they're doing is marking off a place to stab when you turn around. Hello. That's why the Bible says, watch and pray. You can watch everybody. Said all that to say this. Then you've got some in the church. Hey, how many of y'all got in the church that you barely know their name? They're here every service. They're sitting in the back somewhere. You barely know who they are. You barely know they're here. They don't say much. They slip in, slip out. But every time they come, they're bringing somebody to the Lord. Now, what Jesus is showing us by picking these 12 disciples is It takes all of those kinds of people to make this thing work. It takes Phillips. You've got to have Phillips to reel you in, to keep you from going and borrowing $5 million just off the whim. You've got to have Andrews over there. Well, that's so-and-so's sisters, not much about her. I don't know much about her. But Lord, I bet she prays more than anybody in the church. It takes all of those kinds of people to make everything work and work properly. And so that's why Jesus, one of them is Matthew's a tax collector. Well, don't you know he's got his calculator out? You got Luke as a physician. He's a doctor. All of these characteristics that every one of them possessed is what made them so great. It's because they all were different. If everybody in this room was the same, and we thought the same, we acted the same, we'd be a bunch of robots. God made you different. God called them in. He said, this is what it's going to take to make this thing work. And everybody's different in their own certain way. And you've got to have that person there to reel you in. You've got to have this person over here to bring folks to Jesus. And they're not known in the church. Nobody knows who they are. They just slip in, slip out. There they are. They're here. They're faithful. They pray. But you don't know who they are. They're just... And all of these people. And then you've got some that's, the big mouths of the whole church. And you say, well, you're not... No. Look, it takes those two. Sometimes they blurt out something that's sometimes a good idea. Sometimes. Everybody understand that? So you got these 12 disciples that every one of their characteristics. Now, all of these disciples died a martyr's death. Some, James, his head was cut off. They say they cut Paul's head off. Peter was crucified upside down. They tried to crucify Peter on a cross like this. And Peter stopped them and said, I'm not worthy to be crucified like my Lord. Turn me upside down. So what they did, they turned this cross upside down and they buried him with his head down on the ground. Which one? One of them was buried on a cross like this. And they stick both of these in the ground, and they crucified them that way. Every one of these died a martyr's death. So there's a lot of bloodshed that went into making this, or writing this Bible. It just wasn't just put together haphazard. These guys died for what they wrote. They died for what they believed in. That's about all I got. That concludes the New Testament sermon day.